What if the greatest secret on Earth isn't hidden in the stars but buried beneath us? We spend our lives looking upward. We build telescopes that peer into distant galaxies. We send probes to Mars, to the moons of Jupiter, to the edge of the solar system. We search the cosmos for signs of intelligence, for proof that we're not alone. But what if we've been looking in the wrong direction all along? What if the most profound mystery isn't light years away, but miles below our feet? What if an ancient civilization never vanished at all? It just went deeper. The ground beneath you feels solid, permanent, known. But the truth is far stranger. Beneath the thin crust we walk upon lies a world we've barely touched. The deepest hole ever drilled, the Kola Super Deep borehole in Russia, reached only 7.5 miles down. That's less than scratching the surface. The Earth's crust extends up to 30 miles in some places, and beneath that lies the mantle, stretching nearly 1,800 miles deeper still. We know more about the surface of the moon than we do about what exists in those lightless depths. And in that darkness, in those unmapped regions where no human eye has ever seen, could something be waiting? Could something be watching? Tonight, we descend into one of humanity's oldest and most haunting ideas, the notion that Earth is not just a planet, but a shell. That beneath the mountains and oceans, beneath the bedrock and stone, there exists another world entirely. A world of vast caverns and underground seas. A world of forgotten cities and sleeping civilizations. A world that remembers what we have forgotten. This is not just myth. It's not just legend. Throughout history, across every continent and culture, stories have emerged of beings who retreated beneath the earth, of kingdoms hidden in the deep places, of tunnels that stretch for thousands of miles, of lights seen flickering in caves that should be empty. And while science tells us one story about what lies below, the myths tell another. And sometimes, just sometimes, the two begin to overlap in ways that make you wonder. So let's begin this journey together. Let's descend into the earth itself, layer by layer, story by story, until we reach the question that haunts every explorer who has ever stood at the mouth of a cave and felt the cold air rising from below. What if they're still down there? What if they never left? And what if, after all these centuries of silence, they're beginning to wake up? The stories are older than writing itself. Long before humans carved the first symbols into stone, before the first cities rose along the Tigris and Euphrates, there were tales of the world below. The ancient Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki, beings who descended from the heavens but also dwelled in the depths of the earth. In their mythology, the underworld wasn't just a place of the dead, it was a realm of power, of knowledge, of gods who moved between worlds. The goddess Inanna descended into this underworld, passing through 7 gates, shedding her divine garments one by one, until she stood naked before the throne of her sister Ereshkigal, queen of the deep places. What she found there changed her. What she learned there, the myths say, was never meant for mortal ears. The Greeks told similar stories. They spoke of Hades, yes, but also of deeper places. The Titans, those primordial beings who ruled before the Olympian gods, were cast down into Tartarus, a prison so far beneath the earth that an anvil dropped from the surface would fall for 9 days before reaching its floor. But Tartarus wasn't empty. It was alive with the imprisoned, with beings of immense power locked away in the dark. And the Greeks wondered, as humans have always wondered, whether those prison walls would hold forever. In Hindu tradition, the Nagas dwelled in Patala, a subterranean realm of jeweled palaces and underground rivers. These serpent beings were not demons but guardians of ancient wisdom, keepers of secrets that predated humanity itself. They lived in splendour beneath the earth, in cities more magnificent than anything on the surface. And occasionally, the myths say, they would emerge. They would walk among humans, sharing knowledge, teaching arts and sciences that seemed to come from nowhere. Then they would vanish again, descending back into their hidden kingdom, leaving only stories behind. The Hopi people of North America have their own accounts. They speak of the ant people, beings who lived in vast underground cities and who saved humanity during times of great catastrophe. When fire rained from the sky, when the world above became uninhabitable, the ant people opened their tunnels and brought humans down into the safety of the earth. There, in the cool darkness, humanity survived. And when the surface world healed, when it was safe to return, the ant people sent them back up, but the tunnels remained, the cities remained, and some say the ant people are still down there, waiting for the next time they'll be needed. These aren't isolated stories, they appear everywhere. The Tibetan Buddhists speak of Shambhala, a hidden kingdom that exists either in a remote valley or beneath the earth itself. Accounts vary, but all agree it is a place of enlightenment, of advanced beings who have transcended the limitations of ordinary existence. The Norse had their own underworld realms, places like Svartalfheim, where the dark elves dwelled in caverns lit by strange fires. The Celts told of the Tuatha De Danann, a race of godlike beings who, after being defeated in battle, retreated into the hollow hills and mounds of Ireland, creating an entire civilization beneath the green fields. And then there's Agartha. The legend of Agartha is perhaps the most persistent of all. It speaks of a vast underground kingdom, a network of tunnels and cities that spans the entire planet. According to the stories, Agartha is ruled by a being known as the King of the World, a figure of immense wisdom and power who guides the destiny of humanity from below. The capital city, Shambhala, is said to be a place of crystal towers and advanced technology, where beings of light have preserved the knowledge of ancient civilizations that fell long ago. Some versions of the legend claim that Agartha is home to survivors of Atlantis, Lemuria, and other lost continents, refugees who fled underground when their worlds were destroyed. The idea gained particular traction in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Explorers, mystics, and writers became obsessed with the notion of a hollow Earth. In 1818, a former American Army officer named John Cleves Sims Jr. proposed that the Earth was hollow and habitable within, with openings at the North and South Poles. He petitioned Congress to fund an expedition to find these polar openings and explore the inner world. His petition was denied, but his ideas spread. They captured imaginations. They inspired novels like Jules Verne's Journey to the Centre of the Earth and Edgar Rice Burroughs' At the Earth's Core. But these weren't just fantasies. Throughout the 19th century, serious scientists debated the structure of the Earth's interior. Without the ability to see below the surface, without seismology or modern geology, anything seemed possible. Could there be vast caverns, underground oceans, entire ecosystems thriving in the dark? The Earth was a mystery, and the idea that it might contain hidden worlds wasn't considered absurd, it was considered plausible. And then there were the accounts, the stories from people who claimed to have found entrances. In 1908, a Norwegian sailor named Olaf Jansen published a book called The Smoky God, in which he described sailing through an opening at the North Pole and discovering a land inside the Earth, lit by a small interior sun. He claimed to have spent 2 years there, living among tall, advanced beings who spoke an ancient language and possessed technology far beyond anything on the surface. His story was dismissed as fiction, but Jansen insisted until his death that every word was true. In the 1940s, Admiral Richard Byrd, a respected American naval officer and polar explorer, allegedly made a similar claim. According to some accounts, during a flight over the North Pole in 1947, Byrd's plane was drawn into a strange opening in the ice. He descended into a warm green land where he encountered beings who warned him about humanity's use of atomic weapons. They told him that they had been watching, that they had always been watching, and that if humanity continued down its current path, they would intervene. Byrd supposedly recorded this encounter in his diary, though the diary's authenticity has been hotly debated. The official records of his expedition make no mention of any such event. But the story persists, and those who believe it ask, why would a decorated admiral risk his reputation on a lie? These myths and legends share common threads. They speak of beings who possessed great knowledge and power. They describe underground realms of beauty and advancement. They suggest that these civilizations didn't die. They simply withdrew. They went deeper, and they're still there, hidden beneath layers of rock and earth, watching the surface world from below. But why would any civilization choose to live underground? What could drive an advanced society to abandon the sunlight, the open sky, the surface of the world? The myths offer answers. They speak of great catastrophes, of floods that covered the earth, of fires that fell from the sky, of wars so terrible that the only way to survive was to retreat into the depths. They speak of a choice, adapt or perish. And those who went below chose adaptation. They chose survival. They built new cities in the dark. They learned to live without the sun. And over time, they became something else. Something that no longer needed the surface world at all. Could there be truth in these stories? Could ancient civilizations have actually retreated underground? The idea seems impossible, but then again, we've found cities buried beneath other cities. We've discovered entire civilizations that were lost for thousands of years, hidden beneath jungle and sand. We've learned that human history is far older and more complex than we once believed, and if civilizations can be lost on the surface, where we can see them, what might be hidden in places we've never looked? The earth keeps its secrets well, and the deeper you go, the more secrets there are. But that was only the beginning of the mystery. Because while the myths speak of underground kingdoms and hidden civilizations, modern science has revealed something equally strange. The Earth's interior is far more complex, far more mysterious than anyone imagined. And in that complexity, in those vast unexplored regions beneath our feet, there is room for possibilities that blur the line between legend and reality. Let's start with what we know. The Earth is not solid. It's layered, like an onion, with each layer possessing different properties, different compositions, different mysteries. The crust, where we live, is the thinnest layer, a fragile shell of rock that floats atop something far more dynamic. Beneath the crust lies the mantle, a thick layer of semi-solid rock that flows like honey over geological timescales. Deeper still is the outer core, a sea of molten iron and nickel that generates Earth's magnetic field. And at the very centre lies the inner core, a solid sphere of iron under such immense pressure that it remains frozen despite temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun. This is the standard model. This is what we teach in schools. But here's what they don't always mention. We've never actually seen any of this. Everything we know about the Earth's interior comes from indirect measurements. Seismic waves from earthquakes travel through the planet, and by measuring how these waves bend and reflect, scientists can infer what lies below. It's like trying to understand the inside of a locked box by shaking it and listening to how the contents rattle. You can make educated guesses. You can build models, but you can't be certain, and sometimes the data doesn't fit the models. In 2014, scientists discovered something that shouldn't exist. A massive reservoir of water trapped in the mantle, about 400 miles below the surface. This wasn't liquid water. It was water molecules locked inside a mineral called ringwoodite. But the amount was staggering. Some estimates suggest there's more water in this underground reservoir than in all the oceans on the surface combined. The discovery challenged everything we thought we knew about the Earth's water cycle. It raised questions. If there's that much water down there, what else might be hidden in the mantle? What other reservoirs exist that we haven't detected? Then there are the caves. The Earth's crust is riddled with them. Vast networks of tunnels and chambers carved by water over millions of years. The Mammoth Cave system in Kentucky stretches for over 400 miles of mapped passages, and new sections are still being discovered. The Sun Dung Cave in Vietnam is so large that it has its own weather system, with clouds forming inside the cavern. These caves are ecosystems unto themselves, home to species found nowhere else on Earth. Creatures that have adapted to eternal darkness, that have never seen the sun. But these are just the caves we've found. How many more exist, unmapped and unexplored? How deep do they go? In 2018, scientists discovered a network of caves beneath Antarctica, warmed by volcanic activity, where the temperature remains comfortable enough for life to thrive. They found moss, algae, and DNA from unknown organisms. If life can exist in caves beneath the ice of Antarctica, what might exist in deeper, warmer caves elsewhere? The Krubera Cave in Georgia is the deepest known cave on Earth, descending over 7,000 feet below the surface. Explorers who have reached its depths describe an alien world. Vast chambers filled with strange formations, underground rivers that disappear into cracks too narrow to follow, and a silence so profound it feels like pressure against your ears. And even at that depth, they haven't reached the bottom. The cave continues downward into darkness that no light has ever touched. What lies at the end of that descent? Where does it lead? Some researchers have proposed that vast cave systems might exist throughout the Earth's crust, connected by networks of tunnels that span continents. These wouldn't be natural caves in the traditional sense, but rather voids created by geological processes we don't fully understand. Spaces between tectonic plates, gaps left by ancient volcanic activity, chambers formed by the movement of underground water. If such networks exist, they would create a hidden world beneath the surface, a labyrinth of passages and caverns that could theoretically support life. And then there's the question of underground oceans. The discovery of water in the mantle suggests that vast quantities of liquid water might exist deep within the Earth, trapped in pockets and reservoirs we can't detect from the surface. In 2007, scientists found evidence of a massive underground ocean beneath East Asia, estimated to be the size of the Arctic Ocean. It exists in the transition zone between the upper and lower mantle, held in place by immense pressure. Could there be others? Could there be entire seas hidden in the deep places, seas that have never seen the light of day? If such oceans exist, they would be warm, heated by the Earth's internal heat. They would be rich in minerals dissolved from the surrounding rock, and they would be isolated, cut off from the surface world for millions or even billions of years. In such an environment, life could evolve along completely different paths. It could develop forms and functions unlike anything we've ever encountered. It could become something we wouldn't even recognize as life. We've already found evidence that life can thrive in the deep Earth. Microbes have been discovered living in rock nearly 2 miles below the surface, surviving on chemical energy rather than sunlight. These organisms exist in a state of near stasis, reproducing perhaps once every 1,000 years, living in a slow-motion world where time moves differently. They've been isolated from the surface for millions of years, evolving in complete darkness, adapting to conditions that would kill any surface organism instantly, and yet they persist. They thrive. They prove that life doesn't need the sun. It doesn't need the surface. It only needs energy, and the Earth's interior has energy in abundance. So if microbes can live miles below the surface, what else might be down there? Could more complex organisms exist in the deeper caves, in the underground oceans, in the warm pockets of the mantle? Could evolution have taken different paths in those isolated environments, creating ecosystems we've never imagined? And if life can exist that deep, could intelligence? The idea seems far-fetched. But consider this. Intelligence evolved on Earth's surface because it provided an advantage. It helped organisms find food, avoid predators, cooperate with others. But in an underground environment, different pressures would apply. Different advantages would emerge. An intelligent species living in eternal darkness might develop senses we don't possess. Echolocation far more sophisticated than any bat. The ability to detect magnetic fields or seismic vibrations. Forms of communication that don't rely on sound or light. They might build their civilizations not upward, toward the sky, but downward, deeper into the earth. They might measure progress not by how high they can reach, but by how deep they can go. And if such a civilization existed, how would we know? We can't see into the earth. We can't send probes into the mantle. We can barely scratch the surface. If an intelligent species lived just 10 miles below us, in vast caverns warmed by geothermal heat, we might never detect them. They would be invisible to us, hidden behind miles of solid rock. And we would be invisible to them, unless they chose to look up. But what if they have looked up? What if they've been watching us all along? Throughout history, there have been accounts of strange sounds coming from beneath the earth, low-frequency hums that seem to emanate from the ground itself, booming noises with no apparent source. In 2011, people around the world began reporting a phenomenon they called the hum, a persistent low-frequency sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Scientists investigated. They proposed explanations. Industrial noise, tinnitus, ocean waves creating seismic vibrations, but none of the explanations fully accounted for the reports. And some of those who heard the hum insisted it was coming from below, from deep below. Then there are the seismic anomalies, earthquakes that don't fit expected patterns, vibrations detected deep in the earth that have no clear cause. In 2018, a strange seismic signal circled the globe, lasting for over 20 minutes. It was detected by sensors on every continent, but no one felt it. It was too low frequency for human perception. Scientists studied the data and concluded it was likely caused by volcanic activity near Madagascar. But the signal's regularity, its almost rhythmic pattern, struck some researchers as unusual. Almost artificial, almost like a pulse. Could these sounds, these vibrations, be natural phenomena? Almost certainly. The Earth is a dynamic living planet, constantly shifting and moving. Magma flows beneath the crust. Tectonic plates grind against each other. Water moves through underground channels. All of this creates noise, vibrations, signals that we're only beginning to understand. But in that noise, in those signals, could there be something else? Could there be patterns we're missing, messages we're not equipped to hear? The Earth keeps its secrets in the deep places, and the deeper you go, the stranger those secrets become, and some believe they're not sleeping at all. Because while science explores the geological mysteries of the Earth's interior, another thread of investigation has emerged, one that exists in the shadows, in classified documents and whispered conversations, in the space between official explanations and persistent questions. This is where geology meets conspiracy, where ancient myths intersect with modern mysteries, and where the idea of a hidden civilization beneath our feet begins to feel less like fantasy and more like something that might, just possibly, be real. Let's talk about Antarctica. The frozen continent has always been a place of mystery. It's the most remote, most inhospitable place on Earth. A vast expanse of ice and rock where temperatures can drop to -100 degrees Fahrenheit, where winds howl at 200 miles per hour, where the sun disappears for months at a time. For most of human history, Antarctica was unreachable, unknown, a blank space on the map. Even today, despite decades of scientific research, much of the continent remains unexplored. The ice is too thick, the conditions too harsh, the terrain too dangerous. But beneath that ice, something strange has been found. In 1996, scientists discovered Lake Vostok, a massive body of liquid water buried beneath 2.5 miles of ice. The lake is enormous, roughly the size of Lake Ontario, and it's been sealed off from the surface world for at least 15 million years. The water is kept liquid by geothermal heat from below and the immense pressure of the ice above. When researchers finally drilled through the ice and sampled the water in 2012, they found something unexpected. Life. Thousands of species of bacteria, many of them unknown to science, thriving in complete darkness, in water that has been isolated from the rest of the planet since before humans existed. The discovery was remarkable. It proved that life could survive in the most extreme conditions imaginable. It suggested that similar lakes might exist elsewhere, under the ice of Mars, beneath the frozen surface of Jupiter's moon Europa. But it also raised questions. If complex ecosystems can exist in Lake Vostok, what else might be hidden beneath Antarctica's ice? What other lakes exist that we haven't found, and what might live in them? Then there are the anomalies. Satellite imagery of Antarctica has revealed strange features beneath the ice. Geometric patterns that look almost artificial, circular formations that don't match any known geological process, and what some researchers describe as possible structures. In 2001, a team using ground-penetrating radar detected what appeared to be a massive cavity beneath the ice near the Wilkes Land region. The cavity was enormous, stretching for hundreds of miles, and its shape was unusual, too regular, too symmetrical to be a natural formation. Some scientists suggested it might be the impact crater from an ancient asteroid strike, but others wondered if it could be something else, something built. The idea sounds absurd, but consider the history. Antarctica wasn't always frozen. Millions of years ago, it was a temperate continent, covered in forests and teeming with life. Ancient maps, like the Piri Reis map from 1513, appear to show the coastline of Antarctica as it would look without ice, a coastline that wouldn't be accurately mapped by modern explorers until the 20th century. How did a 16th century cartographer have access to such information? The official explanation is that the map is based on older sources now lost, but some researchers suggest a different possibility, that the map depicts Antarctica as it existed in the distant past, before the ice, and that whoever created the original source had he actually been there. Could an ancient civilization have existed in Antarctica? Could they have built cities, developed technology, thrived in that temperate land before the ice came? And when the climate changed, when the glaciers began to advance, could they have gone underground? Could they have built vast shelters beneath the surface, using geothermal heat to survive, waiting out the ice age in the depths? It's speculation, but it's speculation that some people take very seriously. During World War II, Nazi Germany became obsessed with Antarctica. They launched expeditions to the continent, claiming a section they called New Swabia. According to official records, these expeditions were scientific in nature. focused on mapping and whaling. But rumours persisted of something more. Stories emerged of secret bases built beneath the ice, of advanced technology being tested in the frozen wastes, of expeditions searching for something specific, something the Nazis believed was hidden in Antarctica. After the war, these rumours intensified. Some claim that high-ranking Nazi officials had escaped to Antarctica, that they had established a hidden colony there, that they had discovered ancient ruins or technology left by a previous civilization. In 1946, the United States launched Operation High Jump, a massive military expedition to Antarctica led by Admiral Richard Byrd, the same Byrd who would later allegedly encounter beings inside the Earth. The official purpose of Operation High Jump was to establish a research base and test equipment in polar conditions. But the scale of the operation was unusual. It involved over 4,000 personnel, 13 ships and multiple aircraft. It was the largest expedition to Antarctica ever mounted, and it ended abruptly, months ahead of schedule. Byrd returned and gave a press interview in which he made a cryptic statement, warning that in the event of a new war, America could be attacked by fighters that were able to fly from one pole to the other with incredible speed. What did he mean? What had he seen? The official records provide no answers. The details of Operation High Jump remain largely classified, and in the absence of official explanations, speculation has flourished. Some believe the expedition encountered something in Antarctica, something that forced them to retreat. Others suggest they found evidence of an ancient civilization or made contact with beings living beneath the ice. The theories range from plausible to fantastical, but they all share a common thread: the belief that Antarctica is hiding something important, something that powerful governments don't want the public to know. And then there are the restrictions. Today, Antarctica is governed by the Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1959 by 12 nations and now recognized by over 50 countries. The treaty designates Antarctica as a scientific preserve, bans military activity, and prohibits mineral mining. On the surface, it seems like a reasonable agreement designed to protect a fragile environment. But some researchers point out that the treaty also restricts access. You can't just go to Antarctica. You need permits, approvals, official sponsorship. Independent exploration is effectively prohibited. Certain areas are completely off limits, designated as special zones, with no public explanation for the restriction. Why? If Antarctica is just ice and rock, why the secrecy? Why the restrictions? What are they protecting? Or what are they hiding? The questions multiply when you look at other parts of the world. In 1963, a man in Turkey discovered an entrance to an underground city while renovating his home. He had knocked down a wall and found a tunnel. Following it, he discovered Derinkuyu, a massive subterranean complex that extends at least 18 stories below the surface. The city could house up to 20,000 people, complete with living quarters, storage rooms, wells, ventilation shafts, and even a church. It was carved entirely from soft volcanic rock, and it's estimated to be at least 2,000 years old, though some researchers believe it could be much older. But Derinkuyu isn't unique. Over 200 underground cities have been discovered in the Cappadocia region of Turkey, all connected by tunnels that stretch for miles. Who built them? Why? The official explanation is that they were created as refuges during times of war, places where people could hide from invading armies. But the scale is staggering. The engineering required to excavate these cities, to create ventilation systems that work hundreds of feet underground, to build structures that have remained stable for thousands of years. It suggests a level of sophistication that seems at odds with the supposed time period of their construction. And if ancient peoples could build cities like Derinkuyu, what else might they have built? What other underground complexes exist that we haven't found? In 2017, archaeologists in Egypt discovered a massive void inside the Great Pyramid of Giza using cosmic ray imaging. The void is at least 100 feet long, and its purpose is unknown. It's not a burial chamber. It's not a passage. It's just there. Empty space inside a structure that was supposedly mapped and understood. If we can find hidden chambers in one of the most studied monuments on Earth, what might be hidden in places we haven't studied at all? There are stories of vast tunnel systems beneath the Andes Mountains, connecting ancient sites across thousands of miles. In the 1960s, an explorer named Juan Morich claimed to have discovered a massive underground complex in Ecuador, filled with metal plates inscribed with unknown writing. He said the tunnels extended for hundreds of miles, that they contained artifacts from a civilization that predated all known history. He led an expedition to the site, and some of the artifacts he brought back were examined by researchers. The metal plates were real. The writing was unlike any known language. But when Morich tried to return to the tunnels, he found the entrance sealed. The Ecuadorian government had closed it off, declaring the area restricted. Morich died in 1991, and the location of the tunnels died with him. Similar stories emerge from around the world. In Tibet, monks speak of tunnels that lead deep into the mountains, passages that connect to the legendary kingdom of Shambhala. In Peru, locals tell of the Chincana, a vast network of Incan tunnels that supposedly run beneath the entire country. In North America, Native American tribes have legends of tunnel systems used by the ancient ones, passages that lead to underground cities where the old gods still dwell. Are these just stories? Just myths passed down through generations, growing more elaborate with each telling? Perhaps. But sometimes the myths have a way of becoming real. Sometimes the stories lead to discoveries that change everything we thought we knew. In 2013, a team of researchers exploring a cave system in Mexico discovered something extraordinary. A network of tunnels that showed clear signs of artificial modification. The walls were too smooth, too regular. The passages were too straight. And deep within the system they found chambers containing artifacts, tools, pottery, and strange symbols carved into the rock. Carbon dating suggested the artifacts were over 10,000 years old, placing them in a time period when humans were supposedly still hunter-gatherers, not capable of the kind of engineering required to modify caves on such a scale. The discovery was published in a minor archaeological journal, and then largely forgotten. The site was closed to further exploration, officially due to safety concerns. But some of the researchers involved have spoken out, suggesting that what they found was only the beginning. They believe the tunnels extend much deeper, that they connect to other systems, that they might be part of a much larger network, and they wonder why no one seems interested in exploring further, why the site was closed so quickly, why their findings were buried in obscurity. The pattern repeats. Discoveries are made, questions are raised, and then silence. Access is restricted, sites are closed, information disappears into classified files or is dismissed as misinterpretation. And those who ask too many questions are labelled as conspiracy theorists, their credibility destroyed, their findings ignored. But what if they're right? What if there is something beneath us? What if the Earth is honeycombed with tunnels and chambers, some natural, some artificial, some so ancient that we can't even comprehend their origin? What if ancient civilizations did retreat underground? And what if they're still there, hidden in the deep places, watching and waiting? The evidence is fragmentary, the proof is elusive, but the questions remain. And in the absence of answers, the questions grow louder. What if they've been here all along? Because there's another layer to this mystery. one that moves beyond ancient ruins and geological anomalies into something stranger still. This is where the story shifts from what might be hidden beneath the earth to what might be actively present, not sleeping, not dormant, but aware, watching, and occasionally making contact. Throughout the 20th century, as humanity developed the technology to probe deeper into the earth, strange reports began to emerge. Miners working at extreme depths reported hearing sounds that couldn't be explained. Rhythmic tapping that seemed to come from beyond the rock face, voices echoing through tunnels that led nowhere, and in some cases glimpses of passages that shouldn't exist. In the 1970s, workers excavating a new subway line in Moscow broke through into a tunnel that wasn't on any map. The tunnel was old, far older than the city above it, and it extended in both directions into darkness. Engineers explored a short distance before the tunnel was sealed and the incident classified. Official records claim the tunnel was a forgotten sewer from the Tsarist era. But some of the workers who were there tell a different story. They say the tunnel was too well constructed, too precisely engineered to be a sewer. They say it went deep, far deeper than any sewer would need to go. And they say that when they stood at the entrance, they could feel air moving, warm air rising from below, carrying a smell they couldn't identify. A smell like ozone, like electricity, like something alive. Similar incidents have been reported from deep mines around the world. In South Africa, where some of the deepest mines on Earth descend over 2 miles below the surface, miners have reported encounters that defy explanation. Shadows moving in tunnels that should be empty. Equipment malfunctioning in ways that suggest interference rather than mechanical failure. And in a few cases, direct sightings, figures glimpsed in the darkness, humanoid but not quite human, moving with a fluidity that seems wrong, that seems to defy the way bodies should move in space. These reports are dismissed, of course. Miners work in extreme conditions. The heat at those depths can exceed 140 degrees Fahrenheit. The pressure is immense. The darkness is absolute. Hallucinations are common. The mind plays tricks. And yet the reports persist. And they share common elements. The figures are always described as tall, thin, with elongated limbs. They move silently. They seem to observe rather than interact. And when lights are shone in their direction, they vanish. Not by running, but by simply ceasing to be there, as if they've slipped through the rock itself. Could these be hallucinations? Almost certainly in most cases. But what about the incidents where multiple witnesses report the same thing? What about the cases where equipment captures anomalies, temperature fluctuations, electromagnetic disturbances, sounds recorded on audio equipment that no one heard at the time? What about the tunnels that appear and then disappear, sealed so quickly that there's no time to investigate, no time to ask questions? And then there are the abduction accounts. Not the famous alien abduction stories, but something else. Reports of people who claim to have been taken underground. These accounts are rare, often dismissed as fantasy or mental illness, but they share disturbing similarities. The experiencers describe being drawn to caves or mines, feeling a compulsion they couldn't resist. They describe descending into darkness, following passages that seem to shift and change. And they describe arriving in vast chambers lit by a sourceless glow, where they encountered beings who communicated without speaking, who showed them things they couldn't fully comprehend. Visions of the Earth's history, of civilizations that rose and fell, of cataclysms that reshaped the surface world while the deep places remained unchanged. One such account comes from a man named Richard Shaver, who in the 1940s began writing about his experiences in what he called the underworld. Shaver claimed to have discovered an entrance to a vast underground civilization while working in a factory. He said he spent weeks in the tunnels, encountering beings he called deros, detrimental robots, though he later clarified they weren't machines, but rather degenerate descendants of an ancient race. These beings, he claimed, possessed advanced technology and used it to influence events on the surface, causing accidents, manipulating thoughts, creating chaos. Shaver's stories were published in Amazing Stories magazine and became a sensation. Thousands of readers wrote in, claiming they had experienced similar things, that they too had heard voices from below, that they too had encountered the Deros. The scientific community dismissed Shaver's claims as delusion, but the editor who published his stories, Ray Palmer, insisted that Shaver was sincere, that he genuinely believed what he was saying, and Palmer pointed out something interesting. Shaver's descriptions of underground technology, machines that could project thoughts, devices that could see through solid matter, systems that could manipulate energy, bore striking similarities to technologies that would be developed decades later. How could a factory worker in the 1940s describe concepts like remote viewing, electromagnetic manipulation, and directed energy weapons? Was he simply a gifted science fiction writer, or had he seen something real? The Shaver mystery, as it came to be known, faded from public attention, but it left a legacy. It planted the idea that the underground world might not be empty, that it might be inhabited, and that those inhabitants might not be friendly. In the 1960s and 70s, as the UFO phenomenon captured public imagination, some researchers began to propose a radical theory, that UFOs weren't extraterrestrial at all, but rather terrestrial, that they came not from other planets, but from inside our own. The theory suggested that an advanced civilization lived beneath the Earth's surface, that they had been here long before humanity, and that they occasionally emerged to observe us, to study us, perhaps to influence our development. The theory explained why UFOs seem to appear and disappear without travelling through space, why they were often seen near bodies of water or mountains, places where entrances to the underground world might exist. It explained why ancient cultures around the world had stories of beings emerging from caves and returning to the depths. The theory was called the Hollow Earth, or Inner Earth, hypothesis, and while it was never accepted by mainstream science, it gained a following among researchers who felt that the extraterrestrial explanation for UFOs didn't account for all the evidence. They pointed to cases where UFOs were seen entering or exiting bodies, of water, where they seemed to emerge from mountains or disappear into canyons. They noted that many ancient sacred sites, places like Machu Picchu, the pyramids of Giza, Stonehenge, were built near geological features that could potentially provide access to underground spaces. Was this coincidence? Or were these sites chosen specifically because they were close to entrances, because they were places where the surface world and the underground world came close to touching? And then there are the modern sightings. In 2004, Navy pilots encountered an object off the coast of California that defied all known physics. The object, later called the Tic Tac due to its shape, moved in ways that should have been impossible, accelerating instantly, stopping without deceleration, dropping from 60,000 feet to sea level in seconds. The pilots tracked it on radar and with their own eyes, and then it vanished. Not by flying away, but by simply disappearing. Later analysis suggested it might have entered the water. Sonar detected something moving beneath the surface at high speed, something that couldn't be identified. Could it have been a submarine? The Navy investigated and found no evidence of any submarine in the area. Could it have been a secret military craft? Possibly, but if so, it represented technology far beyond anything publicly acknowledged. Or could it have been something else? Something that came from below, that emerged briefly to observe, and then returned to the depths. The incident was declassified in 2017, and the footage was released to the public. The Pentagon confirmed the videos were authentic, but they offered no explanation for what the object was or where it came from. And the pilots who encountered it have spoken publicly about their experience, describing a sense of unease, a feeling that they were being watched, that whatever the object was, it was intelligent and aware. Similar incidents have been reported by sailors and submariners, objects detected on sonar moving at speeds that should be impossible underwater, lights seen beneath the surface, glowing with an intensity that suggests a power source far beyond anything we possess. And in some cases, direct encounters, submarines detecting other vessels in areas where no vessels should be. Vessels that don't respond to hails, that don't match any known design, that simply vanish when approached. The ocean is deep. The deepest parts of the ocean floor are over 7 miles below the surface, and we've explored less than 5% of it. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about the bottom of our own oceans. And if there are entrances to underground civilizations, if there are passages that lead from the ocean floor into the Earth's interior, we would never know. We can't see them. We can't reach them. They would be hidden in the deepest, darkest places on the planet, in regions where the pressure would crush any human-made vessel, where the cold and darkness are absolute. But what if they can reach us? What if they have technology that allows them to move through water, through rock, through the Earth itself? What if they've been observing us for thousands of years, watching our civilizations rise and fall, studying us the way we might study ants? And what if, occasionally they make contact, not openly, not in a way that would reveal their existence, but subtly, through dreams, through visions, through encounters that can be dismissed as hallucination or fantasy? The idea sounds like science fiction, but consider this. If an advanced civilization wanted to remain hidden, how would they do it? They would avoid direct contact. They would operate in places we can't reach. They would use technology we can't detect. And if they were ever seen, they would ensure that the sighting could be explained away, that it would be dismissed as misidentification or delusion. They would hide in plain sight in the one place we never think to look, beneath our feet. And maybe, just maybe, they're not hiding anymore. Maybe they're preparing. Maybe they're watching as we dig deeper, as we probe further into the Earth, as we come closer to discovering what they've kept hidden for so long. And maybe they're deciding what to do about it. But the story doesn't end with observation and mystery. Because if there is a civilization beneath the Earth, if they have been watching us, then the question becomes, what do they want? Why remain hidden? Why not reveal themselves? And perhaps most importantly, what happens when we finally dig deep enough to find them? The answer might lie in the ancient texts, in the warnings that appear across cultures and throughout history. The myths don't just speak of underground kingdoms, they speak of boundaries, of places humans shouldn't go, of depths that should remain unexplored. In Greek mythology, Orpheus descended into the underworld to retrieve his lost love, but he was warned not to look back. When he broke that rule, he lost everything. In Sumerian legend, Inanna's journey to the underworld nearly destroyed her, and she only escaped by sacrificing another in her place. The message is consistent. The underworld is dangerous. It operates by different rules, and those who venture there risk more than their lives. They risk their very souls. These warnings might be metaphorical lessons about death and the afterlife, but what if they're also literal? What if ancient peoples knew something we've forgotten? What if they had encountered the underground civilization, had made contact, and had learned that some boundaries exist for a reason? There's a concept in geology called the Kola Superdeep Borehole Incident. The Kola borehole, drilled by the Soviet Union, reached a depth of over 7 miles before the project was abandoned in 1992. The official reason for abandonment was that the drill encountered temperatures far higher than expected, over 350 degrees Fahrenheit, making further drilling impossible. But rumours have persisted for decades about the real reason the project stopped. Workers at the site reported hearing sounds coming from the borehole. Screams, they said, like thousands of voices crying out in agony. Audio equipment lowered into the hole allegedly recorded these sounds, though the recordings have never been released publicly. Some workers claim to have seen strange gases emerging from the hole, gases that caused hallucinations and paranoia, and there were reports of a creature, something that came up from the depths, something that had to be driven back down before the hole was sealed. These stories are almost certainly false. They have all the hallmarks of urban legend, dramatic details, missing evidence, second-hand accounts. But they've endured because they tap into a primal fear, the fear of what lies beneath. The fear that if we dig too deep, we might find something that was meant to stay buried. And maybe that fear isn't entirely irrational. Because as we develop the technology to probe deeper into the Earth, as we drill further and explore more extensively, we're entering territory that has been untouched for millions of years. We're disturbing ecosystems that have evolved in isolation. We're potentially exposing ourselves to organisms, to substances, to conditions that we're not prepared to handle. In 2020, scientists revived microbes that had been trapped in the seafloor for over 100 million years. The microbes were alive, dormant but viable, waiting for the right conditions to become active again. What else might be waiting down there? What other ancient things might we awaken? And if there is an intelligent civilization in the depths, how would they react to our intrusion? Would they welcome contact? Would they be curious about us, eager to share knowledge and establish communication? Or would they see us as a threat, as invaders encroaching on their territory, disturbing their world, potentially endangering their existence? History suggests the latter. Throughout human history, when two civilizations with vastly different levels of technology have made contact, the results have been catastrophic for the less advanced society. The arrival of Europeans in the Americas led to the collapse of indigenous civilizations, not through direct conflict alone, but through disease, cultural disruption, and the imposition of foreign systems. If an underground civilization is more advanced than us, and if they've survived for thousands or millions of years in the harsh environment of the deep earth, they almost certainly are, then contact could be devastating for humanity. But perhaps they already know this. Perhaps that's why they've remained hidden. Not out of fear, but out of mercy. They've watched civilizations rise and fall on the surface. They've seen humanity's capacity for violence, for destruction, for turning every discovery into a weapon, and they've chosen to wait, to remain in the depths, to let us develop, to let us mature, to see if we can overcome our worst impulses before they reveal themselves. Or perhaps they're waiting for something else. Perhaps they're waiting for us to reach a certain level of development, a certain threshold of understanding. In many of the ancient myths, the underground beings don't appear randomly. They appear at times of great change, at moments when humanity stands at a crossroads. They appear to offer guidance, to share knowledge, to help us navigate transitions that we can't manage alone. The Hopi Ant people appeared during cataclysms. The Nagas shared wisdom with those who sought enlightenment. The beings of Agartha are said to guide humanity's spiritual evolution from below. What if we're approaching such a moment now? What if the environmental changes, the technological advances, the social upheavals of our current era are signs that we're reaching a threshold? And what if the underground civilization is preparing to emerge, to make contact, to offer the guidance we need to survive what comes next? There are those who believe this is already happening. That contact has been made, not publicly but privately, with select individuals or groups. They point to the sudden leaps in technology over the past century, advances that seem to come out of nowhere, that represent quantum jumps rather than gradual progress. They note the secrecy surrounding certain government projects, the classified research into exotic materials and energy sources, the rumours of recovered artefacts that don't match any known human technology. And they wonder, where did these advances really come from? Did we develop them ourselves? Or did we have help? In 1947, the same year Admiral Byrd allegedly encountered beings inside the Earth, something crashed near Roswell, New Mexico. The official explanation changed multiple times. First it was a flying saucer, then a weather balloon, then a classified surveillance device. But witnesses described debris with properties unlike any known material, metal that couldn't be cut or burned, that returned to its original shape when crumpled, that was covered in strange symbols. Where did this material come from? The official story says it was from a secret military project. But what if it came from somewhere else? What if it came from below? And what if the secrecy, the cover-ups, the classified projects aren't about hiding the existence of extraterrestrials, but about hiding something closer to home? What if governments know about the underground civilization? What if they've been in contact for decades, negotiating, trading, trying to manage a situation that could change everything if it became public knowledge? What if the reason we're told to look to the stars for intelligent life is to keep us from looking down? These are questions without answers, speculation built on speculation. But they persist because the alternative, that we're alone, that the Earth is just rock and magma, that there's nothing beneath us but geology, feels somehow incomplete. It doesn't account for the myths, the sightings, the anomalies, the persistent sense that there's more to this planet than we've been told. And maybe that sense is right. Maybe the Earth is more than a planet. Maybe it's a shell, a container, a home to multiple civilizations existing in layers, each unaware of the others, each living in their own world. We exist on the surface, in the thin layer of atmosphere and sunlight. But below us, in the darkness and heat, in the vast caverns and underground seas, another world exists. A world that was here first. A world that will be here long after we're gone. A world that watches and waits and wonders when we'll finally be ready to know the truth. But there's another thread to this mystery that's darker, more personal, and far more disturbing than geological anomalies or ancient myths. It's the thread that connects the idea of an underground civilization to something that happens with unsettling regularity. People vanishing without a trace. Every year, hundreds of thousands of people are reported missing. Most are found. Runaways who return home, adults who chose to disappear, victims of crime whose cases are eventually solved. But a percentage simply vanish. They walk into the wilderness and never walk out. They enter caves and never emerge. They disappear in places where disappearance should be impossible, where there's nowhere to go, no way to simply cease existing, and yet they're gone, completely, as if the Earth itself swallowed them. The National Park Service doesn't keep a comprehensive database of people who go missing in national parks. There's no central record, no Tongi system for tracking these disappearances. Each park maintains its own records, and the information isn't compiled nationally. Why? The official explanation is bureaucratic. Different jurisdictions, different reporting systems, limited resources. But some researchers find this suspicious. The federal government tracks everything else with meticulous detail. Why not this? David Paulides, a former law enforcement officer, has spent years investigating these disappearances. His work, documented in the Missing 411 series, has revealed disturbing patterns. People vanish in national parks and wilderness areas under circumstances that don't make sense. Experienced hikers disappear from well-traveled trails. Children wander away from their parents and are never found, despite massive search efforts. Bodies, when they're discovered, are found in locations that seem impossible, miles away from where the person disappeared, in terrain that would have been impossible for them to traverse, in areas that were searched multiple times. And the details are strange, consistently strange. People disappear near bodies of water, creeks, rivers, lakes. They disappear near boulder fields and rocky areas. They disappear in places where the geography is unusual, where there are cliffs, caves, or geological anomalies. Weather often turns bad immediately after the disappearance, hampering search efforts. Search dogs, highly trained animals with success rates over 90%, lose the scent. They track to a certain point and then stop, as if the person simply ceased to exist at that spot. Sometimes the dogs refuse to track at all, showing signs of distress or fear without any apparent cause. When bodies are found, they're often missing shoes and socks. Their clothing is sometimes removed or in disarray, even in cases where temperature suggests hypothermia wasn't a factor. And perhaps most disturbing, they're found in areas that were extensively searched. Professional search and rescue teams, sometimes accompanied by helicopters with thermal imaging, comb an area and find nothing. Then, days or weeks later, someone walks through the same area and finds the body lying in plain sight. The conventional explanations don't fully account for these patterns. Hypothermia can cause paradoxical undressing, people feeling hot as they freeze and removing their clothes, but it doesn't explain cases in warm weather, or why it happens so consistently. Disorientation can cause people to travel in unexpected directions, but experienced outdoorsmen who know the terrain disappear just as often as novices. Wild animals might explain some disappearances, but bodies would show signs of predation, and animals don't typically remove shoes or carry people miles away to locations that don't match their hunting patterns. What if there's another explanation? What if some of these people didn't get lost, didn't fall victim to exposure or animals, didn't simply wander off and die? What if they found something, or something found them? Consider the geography. Many disappearances occur in areas with extensive cave systems. The United States alone has over 50,000 mapped caves, and experts estimate that represents only a fraction of what exists. Most cave systems remain unexplored. Many haven't even been discovered. They're hidden beneath layers of soil and rock, their entrances obscured by vegetation or sealed by rockfalls. You could walk over a vast cavern and never know it was there, and caves are dynamic. Heavy rains can open new passages, or reveal entrances that were previously hidden. Erosion constantly changes the landscape. A cave entrance that didn't exist last year might appear after a storm. You could hike a trail you've walked 100 times and suddenly notice an opening you've never seen before. An opening that goes down, into darkness, into the deep places. What if some of these missing people found such entrances? What if they explored, driven by curiosity or the strange compulsion that caves seem to exert on certain people? And what if they descended far enough to find something that shouldn't be there? Something that made them realize they weren't alone in the darkness? Or what if they didn't find the entrance at all? What if the entrance found them? There are accounts, scattered and dismissed as folklore, of caves that appear and disappear. Openings that are seen by one person but can't be found again. Passages that seem to shift and change, leading different directions depending on when they're explored. In scientific terms, this is impossible. Caves don't move. Rock doesn't rearrange itself. But if there were an intelligence below, if there were beings who maintained tunnels and controlled access, who could seal entrances and open new ones, who could manipulate the underground geography, then caves that appear and disappear would be exactly what you'd expect to see. And if such beings wanted to remain hidden, if they needed to ensure that surface dwellers who stumbled upon their entrances didn't return to tell others, what would they do? They couldn't simply kill everyone who found an entrance. Bodies would be found, patterns would emerge, questions would be asked. But if they could take people, if they could ensure that anyone who discovered too much simply vanished without a trace, leaving no evidence, no body, no explanation, that would be far more effective. People disappear all the time, search efforts fail, cases go cold, and the underground civilization remains safely hidden. This sounds like paranoid fantasy. But consider the specific patterns. People disappear near boulder fields, areas where cave entrances are likely to be hidden among the rocks. They disappear near water, and underground rivers often surface temporarily before disappearing back into the rock, creating potential access points to deeper systems. They disappear in areas with unusual geology, exactly where you'd expect to find the weaknesses in the crust, the places where the underground world comes closest to the surface, and consider the cases where people are found alive. These are rare, but they exist. Children found miles away from where they disappeared, sometimes days later, with no clear explanation for how they survived or where they were. When questioned, they often can't or won't explain what happened. Some are too young to articulate their experience. Others claim they don't remember. And some tell stories that are dismissed as childhood fantasy. Stories of being taken underground, of meeting strange people, of being in a place that was dark but not cold, where there were lights that didn't flicker like fire and sounds that weren't quite like anything they'd heard before. In 1969, a 6-year-old boy named Dennis Martin disappeared in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. He was with his family, playing with other children in an open area. He ran ahead to hide behind some trees, intending to jump out and scare his father. He never emerged. Massive search efforts involving hundreds of people found nothing. No trace, no clothing, no sign of what happened. But another family, hiking in the area at the time of the disappearance, reported seeing something strange. A man carrying something through the woods, moving unusually fast, heading away from the trails toward the more remote areas of the park. They couldn't see clearly what he was carrying, but from a distance it looked like it might have been a child. The man was never identified. He wasn't part of the search party. He wasn't a park employee. He was just there, and then gone. Search dogs tracked Dennis's scent to a road, where it vanished, suggesting he might have been taken in a vehicle. But the area was remote, and no vehicles had been reported in that section. No tire tracks were found, and the witness description of the man didn't match any known individuals in the area. Dennis Martin was never found. The case remains unsolved over 50 years later, and the detail that haunts investigators is this. The witness who saw the man said he moved strangely, not like someone struggling to carry a heavy load through difficult terrain, but smoothly, almost effortlessly, as if the weight meant nothing, as if he was far stronger than a normal person should be. What if that man wasn't from the surface? What if he'd emerged from one of the many unmapped caves in the Smokies, found a child alone and vulnerable, and taken him back down into the depths? The cave entrances would have been searched, of course, but only the known entrances, only the mapped caves. If there were hidden passages, concealed openings used by beings who knew the underground territory intimately, those wouldn't have been found. The search parties would have walked right over them, never knowing they were there. This is one case, but there are hundreds of others with similar strange details. The boy in Crater Lake National Park who vanished and was found 3 days later, alive, 8 miles away in an area that had been searched. He couldn't explain where he'd been. He said a robot grandmother had helped him. The authorities assumed he was confused, traumatized, confabulating. But what if he was describing something real? Something he didn't have the vocabulary to properly explain? What if robot grandmother was a child's attempt to describe a being that looked almost human but not quite, that moved mechanically or wore something that looked like mechanical clothing, or the experienced hunter who disappeared in the Cascade Mountains? His rifle was found leaning against a tree fully loaded. His pack was nearby, undisturbed. But he was gone. Search efforts found no trace. 2 years later, his body was found 12 miles away, in a location that made no sense. He would have had to cross 2 mountain ridges to get there, traverse terrain that was extremely difficult even for experienced climbers, and he would have had to do it without his gear, without his rifle, in conditions that should have killed him long before he reached that location. The coroner couldn't determine cause of death. The body showed no signs of trauma, no evidence of exposure severe enough to be fatal, no indication of what had killed him. He was just dead, as if something had stopped his heart and left him there. What if he'd encountered something in those mountains? What if he'd found an entrance, or been found by something that emerged from below? What if he'd been taken underground, held for some period of time, and then returned to the surface, but not to the same location? What if the underground civilization had transport systems, tunnels that connect distant points, allowing them to move rapidly through the earth while surface dwellers struggle over difficult terrain? They could have taken him in near where he disappeared and released him, or his body, miles away, in a location that would confuse investigators and make the case unsolvable. These speculations might seem extreme, but they explain the patterns in ways that conventional theories don't. They explain why dogs lose scent trails at specific points. If a person is taken through a hidden cave entrance, the scent would stop at that spot. They explain why bodies are found in impossible locations. If they're transported through underground passages and then brought back to the surface, they could emerge anywhere. They explain the missing clothing and shoes. If someone is held in an underground environment with different temperature and conditions, their surface clothing might be removed. They explain why searches fail and then later succeed. If the person or body is underground during the initial search and only return to the surface later, the search parties would find nothing the first time and something the second time. And they explain the most disturbing detail of all: the clusters. Disappearances don't happen randomly across the landscape. They cluster in specific areas. The same locations see multiple disappearances over years or decades. Certain parks, certain wilderness areas, certain regions have far more missing persons cases than statistical probability would suggest. Yosemite, the Great Smoky Mountains, the Cascade Range, areas of Alaska, sections of Canada's wilderness. These places aren't just remote or dangerous. Plenty of remote and dangerous places have normal disappearance rates. These specific locations have patterns, repeating patterns. What if these locations are where the entrances are? What if these are the places where the underground world comes closest to the surface, where the boundaries are thinnest, where beings from below most frequently emerge? And what if the disappearances aren't accidental encounters, but something more deliberate? What if the underground civilization occasionally needs something from the surface? Resources, genetic material, information, or purposes we can't even imagine? And what if they've established collection points, specific locations where they know surface dwellers will pass, where they can observe and select individuals who meet whatever criteria they're using? The idea is horrifying. It suggests that some of the missing aren't victims of accidents or bad luck, but of selection, that they were chosen, taken deliberately, and that somewhere beneath our feet In the deep places we can't reach, they might still be there. But we need to be careful here. It's easy to see patterns where none exist, to connect dots that shouldn't be connected, to construct conspiracy theories from coincidence and tragedy. The vast majority of missing persons cases have mundane explanations. People get lost, they make poor decisions, they're victims of crime or accident. The wilderness is genuinely dangerous, and even experienced outdoorsmen can fall victim to a moment of inattention, a sudden weather change, a simple mistake that cascades into catastrophe. And yet, there are cases that don't fit, cases where every conventional explanation has been exhausted and nothing makes sense, cases where the strangeness is so pronounced that investigators are left baffled, unable to close the case because they simply can't determine what happened. Let's look at one more in detail, because the specifics matter. In July 2015, a 19-year-old named Garen Kirk was hiking with friends in the Tonto National Forest in Arizona. The group reached a swimming hole along a creek and decided to rest. Garen told his friends he was going to walk back to their car to get something they'd forgotten. It was a simple walk back along the trail they'd just hiked. He'd done it before. He knew the route. He left the swimming hole and headed back up the trail. He never reached the car. His friends waited, then went looking for him. The trail was clear, well marked, easy to follow. There were no side paths he could have taken by mistake, but he wasn't there. They searched for hours, then called for help. Search and rescue teams arrived. They searched the trail, the surrounding area, the creek bed. They used dogs, helicopters, thermal imaging. The search expanded to cover hundreds of acres. Volunteers joined. Days passed. No sign of Garen. Not his backpack, not his clothing, not a single footprint. Nothing. The search continued for weeks, then months. The case went cold. Garen Kirk had simply vanished on a clear, well-travelled trail in broad daylight, walking a route he'd hiked less than an hour before. 3 years later, his remains were found, not on the trail, not near the creek, but 7 miles away, in a completely different canyon, in an area that had no connection to where he'd disappeared. The remains were scattered, partial, incomplete. Forensic analysis couldn't determine cause of death. There was no evidence of animal predation. The bones weren't gnawed or scattered in a pattern consistent with scavengers. They were just there, arranged almost deliberately in a location that made no logical sense. How did he get there? The terrain between the trail and where he was found was brutal. Steep cliffs, dense vegetation, areas that would have been extremely difficult to traverse. Why would he have gone in that direction? There was nothing there. No reason to leave the trail and strike out cross-country toward a remote canyon. And if he had, if he'd somehow become disoriented and wandered off, where was the rest of him? Where were his clothes, his shoes, his backpack? Why were only partial remains found? Search and rescue personnel who work the case say it's one of the strangest they've encountered. The lead investigator, in an interview years later, admitted he had no explanation. It's like he was taken somewhere else, he said, and then parts of him were brought back. I know how that sounds, but I don't have a better theory. Taken somewhere else, and then brought back. What if that's exactly what happened? What if Garen encountered something on that trail, something that the other hikers didn't see because they were at the swimming hole? What if an entrance opened, or a being emerged, and he was taken? Not killed, taken, alive, brought underground for, what? Study? Experimentation? Purposes we can't fathom? And then, after whatever was done with him was complete, parts of him were returned to the surface, not to the same location, but to a distant canyon. A message, perhaps, or a disposal, or simply the action of beings who don't think the way we do, who don't understand or care about how their actions appear to us. This is speculation built on tragedy. Garen Kirk's family deserves answers, and turning their loss into fodder for underground civilization theories might seem disrespectful. But what if the truth is stranger than the conventional explanations were offered? What if refusing to consider unconventional possibilities means we'll never understand what really happened? And Garen's case is not unique. There are dozens of others with similar details. People vanishing in areas where vanishing should be impossible. Remains found in locations that don't match where the person disappeared. Bodies showing no clear cause of death. Evidence of transport without explanation. And in some cases, strangest of all, survivors who emerge with fragments of memories they can't quite piece together. In 2017, a woman in her 30s went missing while hiking alone in Montana. Search efforts found nothing. 6 days later, she walked out of the forest on her own, 15 miles from where she disappeared, on the other side of a mountain range. She was dehydrated and disoriented, but otherwise unharmed. When questioned about where she'd been, she became agitated. She said she didn't remember most of it. She remembered walking, remembered realizing she was lost, and then gaps, blank spaces. She had flashes of memory, being in darkness, feeling stone around her, hearing water echoing, seeing lights that moved strangely. But she couldn't construct a coherent narrative. She insisted she hadn't climbed over the mountain, that she couldn't have. She didn't have the gear or the skill, and yet somehow she'd ended up on the other side. Medical evaluation found nothing wrong with her except dehydration. No head injury that might explain amnesia. No drugs in her system. No signs of assault or trauma. She was simply missing 6 days of memory and had travelled a distance that should have been impossible given her condition and experience level. She was asked if anyone had helped her. She paused for a long time before answering. "I think so," she said, "but they weren't. I don't think they were people. Not exactly." When pressed to elaborate, she became more agitated and refused to discuss it further. She was later diagnosed with PTSD related to the incident, but she never gave a full account of what happened during those missing days. In interviews years later, she maintained that there were things she couldn't talk about, not because she was hiding them, but because she didn't have words for them. It was like being in a dream, she said. Everything felt wrong, the proportions were wrong, the sounds were wrong, and the people, if they were people, they moved wrong, like they were imitating human movement but didn't quite understand how it worked. This description echoes other accounts from people who claim to have had encounters with underground beings. The sense of wrongness, the feeling that something is almost human but not quite, the movement that doesn't look natural, the environments that feel alien despite being underground on Earth, the gaps in memory, the difficulty articulating what was experienced, the sense of having been somewhere that shouldn't exist. Skeptics would say these are the effects of trauma and exposure. The brain under stress creates false memories, fills in gaps with confabulation, generates experiences that feel real but aren't. A person lost in the wilderness, disoriented, dehydrated, afraid, might hallucinate. They might construct memories to explain the unexplainable gaps. The strange movements they remember might be their own distorted perception. The beings might be other hikers encountered during a period of confusion. But what about the physical evidence? How did she cross a mountain range? How did she end up 15 miles away in terrain she couldn't have traversed in her condition? The skeptical explanations account for the subjective experiences but not the objective facts. She was here, then she was there. Something happened in between. What if she was taken through underground passages? What if the tunnels that allegedly exist beneath the Earth's surface provide a way to travel distances that would be impossible to cover on the surface terrain? You could enter a cave system on one side of a mountain and emerge on the other, without having to climb over it. You could travel miles through passages while barely exerting yourself. And if an underground civilization maintains these tunnels, if they use them regularly, they would know every passage, every route, every entrance and exit. Why would they help a lost hiker? Perhaps they wouldn't, intentionally. Perhaps she stumbled upon an entrance and wandered into their territory. Perhaps they found her there, in their tunnels, and rather than harm her, they simply guided her out. Not to where she entered, but to the nearest exit. To them, it might have been a matter of removing an intruder with minimal fuss. To her, it was a fragmentary nightmare she couldn't fully remember or understand. Or perhaps it was more deliberate. Perhaps they study us. Perhaps they occasionally take surface dwellers into their realm, observe them, test them, try to understand what we are and how we think. And then they return us, wiping or suppressing memories, leaving us with only fragments and confusion. We return to our world insisting something happened, something strange, but unable to prove it, unable to convince others. The perfect cover, the perfect way to maintain secrecy while still satisfying curiosity. This isn't just about missing persons, it's about the gap between what we're told is possible and what people actually experience. It's about the narratives we're given, that the wilderness is dangerous, that people get lost, that exposure and animals and bad luck explain everything, and the nagging sense that sometimes something else is happening, something we're not supposed to talk about, something we're encouraged to dismiss. And then there are the caves themselves, the entrances to the underworld if they exist, the portals between our world and theirs. Cavers, people who explore caves as a hobby or profession, have their own culture, their own stories, their own unwritten rules. And one of those rules is this: there are some caves you don't talk about, some caves where strange things happen, some caves that have a reputation. It's not formalized. There's no official list. But ask experienced cavers and they'll tell you. Certain caves have a feeling, an atmosphere. You enter them and something feels wrong. The air moves in ways that don't match the known passages. You hear sounds that don't have sources. You see lights in the distance that shouldn't be there. And experienced cavers, people who have spent thousands of hours underground, who know how to assess risk and when to trust their instincts, will tell you. When cave feels wrong, you leave. You don't explore further. You don't try to explain the anomalies. You just leave and you don't go back. Why? What are they afraid of? Ask directly, and you'll get vague answers. It's just a feeling. Experience tells you when something's off. You learn to trust your gut. But press harder. Talk to cavers who've been exploring for decades. Get them in private conversation after a few drinks, and sometimes you'll hear more. Stories about passages that seem to go on forever, far longer than the known extent of the cave system. Chambers that are too large, too regular, too smooth to be natural. Passages that show signs of tool marks, of being carved or modified, but in rock so old that humans couldn't have done it. And sometimes, very rarely, signs that someone or something else is using the caves. Recent signs, evidence of passage, marks in the mud or dust that don't look quite like human footprints. These stories don't make it into official cave surveys. They're not published in speleological journals. They're shared quietly among people who've seen similar things, who understand that talking about it too openly means being dismissed as paranoid or attention-seeking. But the stories persist, and they're more common than you might think. In the Tag region, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, where some of the most extensive cave systems in the United States are located, there are caves that are marked on maps but not explored, not because they're too dangerous or too difficult, but because they have a reputation. Cavers who entered them reported feeling watched. They found evidence of recent activity in areas that should have been untouched for millennia. They had equipment failures that couldn't be explained. And in a few cases they saw things they couldn't identify. Figures in the distance, lights that moved with apparent intelligence, passages that seemed to close off or change between visits. One caver, exploring a system in Tennessee in the late 1990s, described finding a passage that sloped downward at a steep angle. He followed it for over an hour, descending far deeper than the known extent of the cave. The walls became smoother, the passage became more regular, and then he found something that made him stop. A section of wall that was absolutely flat, smooth as polished stone, with a seam running down it like a doorway. He examined it closely. It wasn't natural. The seam was too perfect, too regular. It looked like it had been cut, like something was meant to open there. He took photographs. He marked the location carefully on his map. And then he left, because the feeling of wrongness had become overwhelming. The sense that he was somewhere he shouldn't be, that he was being watched, that something was about to happen. He reached the surface and immediately reported his findings to other cavers, suggesting a major expedition to document what he'd found. They returned a week later with the team. They followed, his map to the sloping passage. They descended for over an hour, matching his route exactly. But the smooth-walled section with the seam wasn't there. The passage ended in a natural collapse, with rubble blocking further progress. There was no flat wall, seam, no sign that the passage had ever extended further. The photographs he'd taken showed exactly what he'd described. The perfectly smooth wall, the seam, the passage continuing beyond. But it wasn't there anymore. The team searched for hours, thinking they'd somehow gotten turned around or followed the wrong route. But the rest of his map was accurate. They were in the right place. The passage had simply changed, or the doorway had been sealed, or the photographs showed something that existed only briefly, a glimpse behind a veil that had closed again. The caver never went back to that system. He continued exploring other caves, but he stopped talking about what he'd found. When asked years later, he would only say, "There are things down there. I don't know what they are, but they don't want to be found, and I think we should respect that. This is one account, but there are others, many others, a pattern of experiences that suggest the caves are not what we think they are, that some of them go deeper than mapped, connect to systems we haven't discovered, and occasionally provide glimpses of something that exists beyond our explored world. And sometimes people don't come back from these explorations. Cavers disappear underground. Sometimes their bodies are recovered, the victim of a fall, a flood, a collapse. But sometimes they're never found. The caves are searched, every passage checked, every chamber examined, and the person is simply gone, vanished into the limestone darkness. Where do they go? Did they fall into unexplored passages that haven't been found? Did they become disoriented and wedge themselves into tight spaces where they'll never be discovered? These are the official explanations, but cavers, people who know these systems intimately, sometimes wonder, because the disappeared aren't always inexperienced. Sometimes they're veteran explorers who know the caves better than anyone. Sometimes they vanish in systems that have been mapped completely, where there shouldn't be any unexplored areas. Sometimes they vanish in ways that don't make sense, and sometimes, rarely, they come back, changed. There's an account from the 1970s of a caver who disappeared in a West Virginia system. He was exploring alone, a violation of safety protocols, but experienced cavers sometimes bend the rules. He was due to return by evening. He didn't. A rescue team went in, searched for 3 days, found nothing. The cave was extensively mapped. There was nowhere he could have gone that they didn't check. They concluded he must have died and his body was in an area they couldn't reach, a tight passage or underwater section where it wouldn't be found. 2 weeks later, he walked into a police station 3 states away. He was disoriented, malnourished, but alive. He couldn't explain where he'd been. He had no memory of most of the 2 weeks. He remembered entering the cave, remembered exploring, and then nothing. Blank. He woke up walking along a highway in Pennsylvania, hundreds of miles from where he'd disappeared, with no idea how he'd gotten there. Medical examination found no signs of injury or drug use. He wasn't faking amnesia. His confusion and distress were genuine. He had no money, no ID, no explanation. He was simply missing 2 weeks of his life and had somehow travelled across multiple states. In later years, he had occasional flashes of memory, being in darkness that felt different from normal cave darkness, seeing structures that didn't look natural, hearing sounds, rhythmic, mechanical, purposeful, and figures. Tall figures that moved smoothly through spaces that should have been too small. But the memories were fragmentary, dreamlike, and he was never sure if they were real or if his mind had constructed false memories to fill the blank space. He never went caving again. He wouldn't even enter a basement if he could avoid it. The underground, he said, was no longer safe for him. Something down there knew who he was, and if he went back he might not get out again. What are we to make of all this? The missing persons, the strange encounters, the caves that seem to lead to places they shouldn't, the people who vanish and return with no memory or emerge with stories that can't be verified. The skeptical explanation is clear. These are isolated incidents, unrelated cases that only seem connected because we're looking for patterns. Memory is unreliable. Trauma causes confusion. The wilderness is vast and dangerous. Caves are disorienting. People get lost, people die, and sometimes the circumstances are strange simply because nature is complex and we don't have all the information. This explanation is probably correct for most cases. The wilderness does kill people. Memory is unreliable. Trauma does create false narratives, but most is not all. And it's the exceptions that haunt us. The cases where every conventional explanation has been tested and found wanting. The cases where the physical evidence contradicts the official narrative. The cases where multiple witnesses report the same anomalies. The cases where the strangeness is so pronounced that even investigators admit they have no idea what happened. What if, in some of these cases, not all, perhaps not even most, but some, the explanation is exactly what it appears to be? What if people are being taken underground? What if there are entrances to deeper systems that most of us never find, but that occasionally swallow the unlucky or the curious? What if an underground civilization exists, and part of their survival strategy is ensuring that anyone who discovers too much simply disappears? It would be a perfect system. Missing persons cases are common. They're tragic but not suspicious. They're explained by natural dangers, and if a small percentage of them are actually abductions by underground beings, how would we know? How would we distinguish between someone who fell into a crevasse and died, and someone who found a hidden entrance and was taken? Between someone who succumbed to exposure and someone who was removed from the surface world? We wouldn't. We couldn't. The underground civilization would be perfectly camouflaged by the natural dangers of the wilderness. Their actions would be hidden in the statistical noise of normal disappearances. And anyone who started to see the pattern, who started to ask the right questions, would be dismissed as a conspiracy theorist, their credibility destroyed before they could make a convincing case. It's elegant in a dark way. It's the perfect cover. And it means that the underground civilization, if it exists, could have been taking people for decades, centuries, and we'd never know. We chalk it up to the dangers of the wilderness, the risks of exploration, the sad but inevitable cost of human interaction with nature. And the people who vanish into the deep places, they're gone, completely, either dead or living in a world we can't reach, in the vast chambers and tunnels that sprawl beneath the Earth's surface. Perhaps some of them adapted. Perhaps some of them survived, learned to live underground, became part of the civilization that took them. Perhaps they're there still, miles beneath us, having given up any hope of return, living out their lives in the warm darkness. Or perhaps they didn't survive. Perhaps they served whatever purpose the underground beings needed and were then disposed of. Perhaps their bodies lie in chambers we'll never find, in the deep places where no light reaches, where no human explorer will ever descend. Perhaps they're part of the Earth now, returned to stone and darkness. We don't know. We can't know, not without going deeper, not without searching the places we've never searched, opening the doors we've never opened, descending into the parts of the Earth that remain unmapped and unexplored. But do we want to know? Do we want to confirm that some of our missing are not lost to nature but taken by intelligence? Do we want to discover that we share the planet with beings who view us as subjects for study, as resources to be harvested, or simply as intruders to be removed? Maybe it's better not to know. Maybe the uncertainty, the mystery, the unanswered questions are preferable to the truth. Because once you know, you can't unknow. Once you understand that the ground beneath your feet conceals not just rock and earth, but passages, chambers, and potentially hostile intelligence, you can never look at the wilderness the same way again. You can never enter a cave without wondering if you'll emerge. You can never walk alone in the forest without feeling watched from below. The missing remain missing. The questions remain unanswered. And somewhere in the deep places, in the darkness beneath our feet, something might be waiting, watching, taking note of who wanders too close, who asks too many questions, who stumbles upon the entrances that are meant to stay hidden. And if you're unlucky, or perhaps, from a certain perspective, lucky, you might be next. You might find the entrance others have missed. You might descend into the darkness and discover the truth. You might meet the civilization that lives in the Earth's hollow places, and then you'll face the final question. Will they let you leave? Will you return to the surface world with your story, your proof, your confirmation that everything you wondered was true? Or will you become another statistic, another missing person, another unsolved case that families mourn and investigators puzzle over and the rest of the world forgets? The Earth has swallowed thousands of us. It will swallow thousands more. And each time we'll comfort ourselves with natural explanations, with wilderness dangers, with tragic accidents that need no further investigation. But sometimes, late at night, when you hear sounds from beneath the ground that don't quite match any natural process, when you feel the vibrations of something moving in the deep, when you stand at the entrance of a cave and feel cold air rising from below, carrying a scent you can't identify, sometimes you'll wonder. And in that moment of wondering, you'll understand that the greatest mystery isn't in the stars above, but in the depths below. The greatest danger isn't from the unknown cosmos, but from the known Earth that isn't as empty as we pretend. The civilization sleeps, or watches, or waits, and occasionally, very occasionally, it reaches up through the stone and claims what it needs from the surface world, and we never see it coming, because we're not looking down, and so we return to the question we began with. What if there's a secret civilization sleeping inside Earth? The evidence is fragmentary. The proof is elusive. Science offers explanations for most of the anomalies: natural caves, geological formations, seismic activity, the trick that isolation and darkness play on the human mind. And yet, the myths persist. The stories continue. The sightings don't stop. And in the space between what we know and what we wonder, possibility lives. Perhaps there is no underground civilization. Perhaps the Earth's interior is exactly what the textbooks say it is. Layers of rock and metal, hot and lifeless, governed by physics and chemistry and nothing more. Perhaps the myths are just stories, the sightings just misidentifications, the anomalies just natural phenomena we don't yet fully understand. Perhaps we're alone on this planet, the only intelligence, the only consciousness, the only ones asking questions about what lies beneath. But perhaps not. Perhaps somewhere in the deep places, in caverns warmed by the Earth's heart, in tunnels carved by ancient hands, in cities built when the surface world was young, something exists. Something that remembers when the continents were different shapes, when the oceans covered different lands, when humanity was just beginning to stand upright and wonder at the stars. Something that has watched civilizations rise and fall, that has seen ice ages come and go, that has survived cataclysms that erased entire species from the surface world. Perhaps they're sleeping, as the myths suggest, dormant, waiting for the right moment to wake. Or perhaps they're not sleeping at all. Perhaps they're awake, aware, watching us through means we can't detect, observing our progress, our struggles, our slow journey toward whatever comes next. Perhaps they're deciding whether we're ready, whether we've learned enough, whether we've grown enough, whether we can be trusted with the knowledge that we're not alone, that we never were, that the Earth has always been home to more than just us. And perhaps one day they'll reveal themselves, not through invasion or conquest, but through invitation. They'll open the doors we've been searching for. They'll show us the passages that lead down into the warm darkness, into the places where the old knowledge is kept, where the ancient technologies still function, where the first civilization still endures. And we'll descend, leaving the surface world behind, entering a realm that exists in myth and legend and the deepest dreams of humanity. Or perhaps they won't. Perhaps they'll remain hidden, as they've always been. Perhaps the boundary between our world and theirs will stay intact, the veil unlifted, the mystery unsolved. Perhaps we'll continue to dig and drill and explore, getting closer but never quite reaching them, finding hints and traces but never proof, living always with the question but never the answer. And maybe that's how it should be. Maybe some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Maybe some boundaries aren't meant to be crossed. Maybe the underground civilization, if it exists, remains hidden, not because they fear us, but because they know that some knowledge changes everything, that some truth can't be unlearned, that once you know what lies beneath, you can never look at the ground the same way again. The Earth keeps its secrets well. It has kept them for billions of years, through ice ages and meteor strikes, through the rise and fall of countless species, through the entire history of life on this planet. And it will keep them still, long after we're gone, long after our cities have crumbled and our civilizations have faded into myth. The deep places will remain, the caverns will endure, and whatever lives there, whatever watches from below, will continue its ancient vigil, patient and eternal, waiting for the day when the surface world is ready to know the truth. Until then, we walk on the thin crust of the earth, building our cities, living our lives, looking up at the stars and wondering if we're alone. And beneath our feet, beneath the concrete and soil, beneath the bedrock and stone, beneath the miles of darkness and heat, something might be looking back. Something might be wondering the same thing. Something might be waiting for us to finally look down. The question remains, the mystery endures. And in the quiet moments when you stand alone in the darkness, when you feel the solid ground beneath you and wonder what lies below, you might sense it. A presence, ancient and vast, hidden in the deep places of the earth. You might feel the weight of all that stone, all that history, all those millions of years of secrets kept in the dark. And you might wonder, just for a moment, if the myths were right all along. If somewhere beneath us, in the warm darkness, in the forgotten places, a civilization sleeps, or watches, or waits, and you might wonder what will happen when they finally wake up. But there's another dimension to this mystery that we haven't fully explored yet, one that takes us beyond the physical evidence and into something more unsettling, the psychological dimension. The question of why this idea resonates so deeply, why it appears in cultures that had no contact with each other, why it persists despite science's assurances that nothing could survive in the conditions we know exist deep within the earth. Is it just human imagination, our tendency to populate the unknown with meaning, to fill empty spaces with stories? Or is it something else, something more fundamental? What if the reason we keep telling these stories, keep returning to this idea of civilizations beneath our feet, is because somewhere in our collective memory we remember them? What if the myths aren't fantasies but records, distorted by time, yes, garbled by transmission across countless generations, but records nonetheless of something that actually happened? There's a concept in psychology called genetic memory, or ancestral memory. The idea that experiences from our ancestors' lives can be passed down through generations, encoded somehow in our DNA or our collective unconscious. The science on this is controversial, but studies have shown that trauma can affect gene expression, that mice can inherit learned fears from their parents, that experiences might leave markers that persist across generations. If this is true, even partially, then what might we have inherited from our ancestors? What memories might be sleeping in our genes, waiting to be triggered? And what if one of those memories is this? The memory of the time when we weren't alone on this planet, when we shared the earth with something else, something that eventually retreated below. What if the reason we feel uneasy in deep caves, why darkness beneath the ground triggers a primal fear, different from the fear of darkness above ground, is because our ancestors learned to fear what lived in those depths? What if the myths aren't warnings about death and the afterlife, but warnings about something real, something our distant ancestors encountered and fled from? Consider the timeline. Modern humans have existed for roughly 300,000 years, but civilization, cities, writing, organized agriculture only emerged about 12,000 years ago. That leaves nearly 300 millennia of human history that exists only in archaeology and inference. We know humans during that time were just as intelligent as we are. They had the same brain capacity, the same cognitive abilities. They survived ice ages, megafauna, environmental catastrophes. They spread across the entire planet. But we have almost no record of their lives, their discoveries, their encounters. What happened during those missing millennia? What did they see? What did they learn? And what did they forget? There's a theory proposed by some researchers studying ancient catastrophe myths that human civilization has risen and fallen multiple times, that we're not the first advanced society to develop on Earth, just the most recent. The theory points to anomalies in the archaeological record, artifacts that seem too advanced for their supposed time period, structures that show evidence of technologies we didn't think existed, knowledge preserved in ancient texts that shouldn't have been possible for people to possess. The Antikythera mechanism, discovered in a shipwreck off Greece, is a mechanical computer from the 2nd century BC, so sophisticated that nothing comparable would be built again for over 1,000 years. The precision of the Great Pyramid's construction, aligned to true north with an accuracy of 3/60th of a degree, using blocks weighing up to 80 tons, transported from quarries hundreds of miles away. The Nazca lines in Peru, massive geoglyphs only fully visible from the air, created by a culture that supposedly had no flight capability. These could be isolated examples of human ingenuity, cultures that achieved remarkable things with limited technology, or they could be remnants, echoes of knowledge that came from somewhere else, passed down from a previous iteration of civilization, or shared by something that existed alongside humanity. And if previous civilizations existed and then collapsed, where did they go? Some would have simply died out, their knowledge lost, their people absorbed into the surviving populations. But what if some of them survived? What if they saw the catastrophe coming? The flood, the ice age, the meteor impact, and they prepared? What if they went underground? The geology supports the possibility. During the Younger Dryas period, about 12,800 years ago, the Earth's climate underwent a dramatic and sudden shift. Temperatures plunged, ice advanced. The change happened so rapidly that some scientists believe it could have occurred over the span of a single decade. Entire ecosystems were transformed. Megafauna went extinct, and human populations, which had been growing and spreading, suddenly contracted. The archaeological record shows a gap, a period where human activity seems to diminish, where settlements are abandoned, where the signs of civilization temporarily vanish. What happened to those people? Where did they go? The standard answer is that they died, that populations crashed due to the harsh conditions. But what if some of them didn't die? What if some of them found shelter in the one place the ice couldn't reach? Underground. Caves would have been the obvious choice. They maintain relatively stable temperatures year-round. They provide protection from wind and weather. Many contain water sources, and in a world where the surface had become uninhabitable, where glaciers covered the land and temperatures made survival impossible, caves would have been humanity's last refuge. But here's where it gets interesting. If populations sheltered in caves for an extended period, decades, centuries, what would happen to them? How would they adapt? We know humans are incredibly adaptable. We've evolved to survive in nearly every environment on Earth. But evolution requires time and pressure. It requires generations living under specific conditions, with specific challenges, and it requires isolation. Populations cut off from the main genetic pool, developing traits in response to their unique environment. What traits would develop in populations living underground? Reduced pigmentation, certainly. Without sunlight, melanin provides no advantage. Enhanced night vision or sensitivity to low light. Possibly changes in hearing, in the ability to navigate by sound and echo. Changes in metabolism to adapt to different food sources, different temperatures, and over many generations, over thousands of years of living in darkness. Who knows what else might change? There are animals that have adapted to cave life, species that have evolved in complete darkness for so long that they've lost all pigmentation, all eye function. They navigate by sensing vibrations in the air and water. They've developed elongated limbs for moving through tight spaces. They've become something distinct from their surface-dwelling ancestors. And if this can happen to fish, to salamanders, to insects, why not to humans? What if some of those populations who went underground during the Younger Dryas never came back up? What if they adapted so completely to subterranean life that they lost the ability or the desire to return to the surface? And what if they continue to evolve, to develop, to build their own civilization in the depths while the rest of humanity slowly rebuilt on the surface? It would explain the myths. Every culture has stories of pale beings who live underground, who emerge occasionally but prefer the darkness. In European folklore they're called the Dverga or dwarves. beings who live in mountains and caves, master craftsmen who create objects of incredible power. In Irish mythology, the Tuatha De Danann retreated into the Cid Mounds, becoming the fairy folk who live in an underground realm. In Norse tradition, the Svartalfar or Dark Elves dwell beneath the earth in Svartalfheim. In Japanese folklore, the Tsuchigumo are spider-like beings who live in caves and tunnel networks. These descriptions share common elements. The beings are typically described as shorter than surface humans, or sometimes taller and thinner. They have pale skin. They possess advanced knowledge of metallurgy, of crafting, of technologies that seem magical to surface dwellers. They're sensitive to sunlight. They prefer the underground, and they're often depicted as having an ambiguous relationship with surface humanity. Sometimes helpful, sometimes hostile, but always separate, always other. What if these aren't fantasy creatures? What if they're descriptions of real populations, human populations that diverged from the surface branch thousands of years ago and adapted to subterranean life? The details would have been distorted over time, certainly. Oral traditions transform reality into myth, but the core might be real. The memory of encountering people who looked different, who lived differently, who possessed knowledge that seemed impossible, but who were fundamentally human, or at least had once been. This would also explain why the myths speak of these beings possessing advanced technology. If a population survived underground through a catastrophic period, they would have needed to develop sophisticated solutions to enormous challenges. How do you breathe in sealed underground spaces? You need ventilation systems. How do you grow food without sunlight? You need artificial light sources or alternative food production methods. How do you navigate vast tunnel networks in complete darkness? You need mapping systems, lighting, possibly echolocation, or other sensory enhancements. And if they were developing these technologies 12,000 years ago, while surface populations were still rebuilding, still working with stone tools and basic agriculture, what would they have by now? How far could their technology have advanced over 12 millennia of continuous development, uninterrupted by the wars and collapses that set back surface civilizations again and again? This brings us to one of the most intriguing aspects of the underground civilization theory, the question of technology. Because if such a civilization exists, if they've been developing in isolation for thousands of years, their technology would be fundamentally different from ours. It would have evolved to solve different problems, to work in different environments, and it might operate on principles we haven't even discovered yet. Think about how our technology developed. We built upward. We created agriculture that depends on sunlight. We developed metallurgy that requires open-air furnaces and abundant fuel. We invented the wheel because we needed to transport things across horizontal distances. We created flight because we wanted to move through the air. Every piece of technology we've developed is optimized for surface living, for an environment with specific characteristics: sunlight, open space, atmosphere, gravity acting in a familiar way. But underground, the constraints are completely different. You can't build upward. You have limited vertical space. You can't depend on sunlight for energy or food production. You can't use traditional combustion because it consumes oxygen and produces toxic gases. You can't navigate by line of sight because sight itself is limited. Every single challenge requires different solutions. So what would underground technology look like? For energy, they might use geothermal sources. The Earth's internal heat is constant and enormous. The deeper you go, the hotter it gets. Civilization with access to those depths would have effectively unlimited energy. They might have developed geothermal power generation thousands of years before we even conceived of it. They might be able to tap into heat sources that we can't reach. using materials and techniques adapted to extreme temperatures and pressures. For light, they might have developed bioluminescence, organic lighting systems using modified bacteria or fungi that produce light through chemical reactions. We're only now beginning to experiment with bioluminescent technology, but a civilization that spent millennia underground would have had strong evolutionary pressure to develop such systems. Or they might use minerals that phosphoresce or fluoresce, stones that store energy and emit light. Or they might have learned to see using non-visible wavelengths, developing the ability to perceive infrared or ultraviolet light. For food production, they might have perfected fungiculture, growing fungi that can thrive in darkness, that can break down rock and minerals into nutrients. They might have developed hydroponic systems that don't require sunlight, using artificial lighting or chemical processes to fuel plant growth. Or they might have moved beyond organic food entirely, developing synthetic nutrition or finding ways to directly metabolize minerals and chemical energy. For transportation, they wouldn't need wheels or vehicles that move across surfaces. Instead, they might use systems optimized for three-dimensional movement through tunnel networks, vertical transport, systems that can navigate narrow passages and sudden drops, possibly vehicles that interact directly with the rock itself, that can somehow move through solid matter or manipulate it. The UFO reports of objects that seem to merge with mountains, that disappear into rock faces, might be observations of such technology in use, and for sensing and communication, they might have developed systems that work through solid rock. Sound travels through rock, but differently than through air. They might communicate using low-frequency vibrations that can traverse miles of stone. They might navigate by sensing electromagnetic fields in the rock, or by detecting minute seismic vibrations. They might have what we'd call a sixth sense, abilities that seem paranormal to us but are simply evolved or engineered capabilities for thriving in their environment. Some of these technologies would seem like magic to us. If you showed a medieval person a smartphone, they'd think it was sorcery. If a subterranean civilization showed us their technology that operates on principles we don't understand, using energy sources we haven't learned to tap, we'd struggle to even comprehend what we were seeing. We'd describe it in terms of our own frameworks, as supernatural, as impossible, as violating the laws of physics, when really it's just physics we haven't discovered yet. This might explain some of the more bizarre aspects of UFO encounters, the objects that accelerate impossibly, that make right-angle turns at high speed, that seem to ignore inertia and gravity. If these aren't alien craft but terrestrial technology from an underground civilization, technology that manipulates gravitational fields or uses propulsion systems we haven't conceived of, then the seemingly impossible movements become merely advanced. The craft that disappear into mountains or water aren't travelling to other dimensions. They're going home, returning to the depths. It might also explain the electromagnetic effects often reported around UFO encounters. Compasses spinning wildly, electronics malfunctioning, vehicles losing power. If underground technology relies heavily on electromagnetic manipulation, for power, for propulsion, for communication, then when it operates near the surface, it would create interference. It would disrupt our relatively primitive electronic systems the way a powerful magnet disrupts a compass, and it might explain why encounters with these craft rarely result in direct contact. If an underground civilization wanted to remain hidden, they would minimize interaction with surface dwellers. They would observe from a distance. They would use drones or remotely operated craft. They would show themselves just enough to monitor our development, our capabilities, our intentions, but not enough to confirm their existence. They would stay in the shadows, in the spaces between proof and possibility. But why? If they possess such advanced technology, if they're so far ahead of us, why hide? Why not reveal themselves, make contact, share their knowledge? The answer might be simple: survival. Throughout human history, whenever a technologically advanced civilization has encountered a less advanced one, the result has been conquest, colonization, exploitation. The advanced civilization, confident in its superiority, imposes its will on the weaker one. Resources are extracted, populations are subjugated, cultures are destroyed. It's a pattern that has repeated across every continent, in every era of human history. An underground civilization would know this pattern. They might have witnessed it playing out on the surface for thousands of years. They might have watched as empires rose and fell, as stronger nations conquered weaker ones, as technological advantage always translated to dominance. And they would understand that if they revealed themselves, if surface humanity knew they existed, we would eventually come for them. Not out of malice necessarily, but out of the same drives that have fueled human expansion since the beginning. Curiosity, greed, the desire for resources, the compulsion to explore and claim everything we can reach. We would want their territory, the vast underground spaces they inhabit. We would want their resources, the minerals, the geothermal energy, the underground water. We would want their technology, the power systems, the transportation methods, whatever breakthroughs they've achieved, and we would take them the way we've taken everything else, the way we've destroyed indigenous populations, ecosystems, anything that stood in the way of expansion. So they hide, not because they're weak. If their technology is as advanced as we suspect, they could probably defend themselves effectively. But because conflict would be costly for both sides. Because once their existence became known, the secret couldn't be contained. Because the moment surface humanity confirmed that habitable spaces existed underground, that resources were available, that another civilization was there, we would find a way to reach them. We would dig deeper. We would send expeditions. We would find the entrances, and everything would change. From their perspective, remaining hidden isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's the choice to avoid a confrontation that serves no purpose, to maintain a separation that benefits everyone. They live in their world, we live in ours, and as long as the boundary holds, as long as we don't discover them, both civilizations can exist in parallel, occupying the same planet but inhabiting different realms. But boundaries don't hold forever. Because we keep digging, we can't help ourselves. It's in our nature to explore, to probe, to push deeper into every frontier we can find. And with each passing decade, our technology improves. We drill deeper, we map more extensively, we develop tools that can see through solid rock, that can detect voids and chambers miles below the surface. We're getting closer, and if there is something down there, something that has remained hidden for thousands of years, we're approaching the moment when hiding becomes impossible. Consider the progress we've made. The Kola Super Deep borehole reached 7.5 miles. The Sakhalin well, drilled for oil extraction, extended over 7.7 miles, though at an angle rather than straight down. The current technology for deep drilling is far more advanced than what existed even 20 years ago. We can drill in higher temperatures, in harder rock, with greater precision, and we're motivated to go deeper for geothermal energy, for mineral resources, for scientific research. There are proposals now for drilling projects that would penetrate the Earth's mantle, reaching depths of over 9 miles. The International Ocean Discovery Program has plans to drill through the oceanic crust, which is thinner than continental crust, to access the mantle directly. If successful, these projects would reach depths no human technology has ever touched. They would penetrate regions that have been sealed off from the surface for billions of years. What would we find there? Scientifically, we'd gain invaluable data about the Earth's composition, its formation, its internal dynamics, But what else might we find? What if those depths are where the boundary exists? What if 9 miles down we break through into something that isn't just rock and heat, but space, chambers, infrastructure? And even if we don't reach their actual living spaces, we might reach their territory. We might drill into regions they consider theirs, that they've marked as off-limits, and they would notice. They would detect the vibrations, the disturbance, the intrusion into areas they've kept sealed. What would they do? Would they simply avoid the intrusion, moving their operations to different areas? Or would they respond? Would they take action to protect their territory, their secrecy, their survival? There have been incidents that suggest the latter might be true. Drilling projects that have encountered unexpected problems, equipment failures that couldn't be explained, anomalous seismic activity around drill sites, and in a few cases projects that were abruptly cancelled with vague explanations about budget constraints or technical difficulties. In 2009, a deep drilling project in Iceland designed to tap into geothermal resources was suddenly terminated. The official explanation was that the drill had accidentally penetrated a magma chamber, creating conditions too dangerous to continue. But some of the engineers involved reported strange readings before the shutdown, electromagnetic anomalies that didn't match volcanic activity, vibrations that seemed artificial rather than geological. The drill site was sealed, and further exploration in that area was prohibited. Why? If they had successfully reached a magma chamber, that would be a breakthrough. The first time humans had directly accessed molten rock. It would be a scientific triumph. But instead, the project was buried, the data classified, the site abandoned. Similar incidents have occurred elsewhere. A mining operation in South Africa that was closed after workers reported hearing mechanical sounds coming from beyond the rock face. Sounds that couldn't be explained by any known geological process. A tunnel excavation in China that stopped abruptly when scanners detected a large void ahead. A cavity that shouldn't exist according to the geological surveys. The project was rerouted, the original tunnel sealed, and no official explanation was provided. These could be coincidences. Every large-scale drilling or excavation project encounters unexpected challenges. Equipment fails. Conditions are harsher than anticipated. Safety concerns force shutdowns. It would be irresponsible to continue projects that pose danger to workers or the environment, and the fact that these incidents occur across different countries, different contexts, different types of projects, might simply reflect the universal challenges of working at extreme depths. But the pattern is interesting. Projects that suddenly stop when they reach certain depths, sites that are sealed rather than simply abandoned, explanations that feel incomplete, and in several cases reports from workers of things that don't fit the standard narrative. Sounds, sightings, readings on equipment that suggest something other than natural geology. And then there's the official secrecy. Many countries have classified projects related to deep Earth exploration. The reasons given are usually economic, protecting information about resource deposits, maintaining competitive advantage in mining or energy production. But some researchers point out that the level of classification seems excessive. Why would geological data be considered a matter of national security? Why would information about what exists 10 miles underground be treated as more sensitive than information about satellites or military technology? Unless what they found isn't just geology. Unless the classification isn't about protecting economic interests, but about preventing panic, maintaining social stability, managing a truth that most people aren't ready to handle, that we're not alone on this planet, that something else is down there, and that we're getting close to finding it. The governments would have a difficult choice to make if deep drilling projects confirmed the existence of an underground civilization If they found clear evidence of artificial structures or detected signs of intelligent activity, what would they do? Announce it to the world? The implications would be staggering. Every assumption about human history, about our place on Earth, about our uniqueness would be challenged. Religious institutions would struggle to reconcile the discovery with their doctrines. Economic systems would destabilize as people questioned whether resources belonged to surface humanity or were shared with the underground inhabitants. Military forces would mobilize, preparing for potential conflict with an unknown entity. Or would they keep it secret? Would they classify the information, limit access to a small group of officials and scientists, and work quietly to understand the situation before making any public announcements? Would they try to establish covert contact, to negotiate, to determine the intentions and capabilities of the underground civilization before revealing their existence? History suggests they would choose secrecy. Governments have consistently classified information they believe could cause social disruption. The truth comes out eventually but slowly, in managed doses, after preparations have been made to handle the consequences. And if the truth is that we share this planet with another intelligent civilization, one that possesses technology beyond ours, one that has been here longer than us, one that might view our expansion as a threat, that truth would be managed very carefully indeed. But secrets don't hold forever. They leak, they fragment. Pieces emerge in different places, a testimony here, a document there, a pattern that researchers piece together from disparate sources, and gradually the secret stops being a secret and becomes instead an open question, something that enough people know about that denial becomes impossible, but not so many that it forces official acknowledgement. We might be at that point now. The idea of an underground civilization, once dismissed as pure fantasy, has gained enough traction that it's discussed seriously in some circles. Documentaries explore it, researchers investigate it, and while mainstream science still rejects the notion, the rejection feels less certain now, more defensive, because the evidence keeps accumulating, the anomalies keep appearing, the questions keep multiplying, and perhaps, just perhaps, we're approaching the moment when the truth becomes undeniable. But what would that truth actually look like? If we confirmed that an underground civilization exists, if we somehow made contact or discovered proof of their presence, what would we actually be dealing with? What would they be like, these beings who have lived beneath the earth for thousands of years? The answer depends on how long they've been separated from surface humanity. If the separation occurred 12,000 years ago, during the Younger Dryas, then we're talking about roughly 500 generations of isolated evolution and cultural development. That's enough time for significant changes to occur, physical adaptations to the environment, cultural divergence, technological progress along completely different paths. Physically, they might be recognizable as human but distinct. Pale skin from lack of sun exposure, possibly completely white or even translucent. Eyes adapted to darkness, perhaps larger to gather more light, or perhaps atrophied if they rely on other senses for navigation. Changes in body proportions to suit three-dimensional movement through tunnels, possibly shorter and stockier for stability in enclosed spaces, or possibly taller and thinner for navigating vertical shafts. Differences in bone density to handle different gravitational stresses, different pressures, enhanced hearing and tactile senses, possibly biological bioluminescence, the ability to produce light through chemical reactions in their skin or eyes. Some of these traits would make them appear alien to us, despite sharing common ancestry. We might not immediately recognize them as human, and they probably wouldn't recognize us as kin either. After 12,000 years of separation, after adapting to such different environments, the physical differences would be substantial enough that both populations might view each other as something other, something foreign. Culturally, the divergence would be even greater. Culture evolves faster than biology, changing with each generation, shaped by environment, technology, challenges, values. A civilization that has spent 12 millennia underground would have developed completely different cultural frameworks from surface humanity. Their concept of space would be fundamentally different. We think horizontally, in terms of land, territory, geographical boundaries. We build along the surface, spreading outward. They would think vertically and three-dimensionally. Their cities would extend up and down, interconnected through multiple levels. Their concept of territory would be volumetric rather than planar, and their sense of claustrophobia and agoraphobia would be inverted from ours. They might feel exposed and vulnerable in open spaces, comfortable only when surrounded by stone. Their relationship with darkness would be different. We fear the dark, instinctively associating it with danger and the unknown. They would embrace it, see it as natural, possibly even prefer it to light. Darkness would be their medium, the element in which they're most comfortable. An exposure to bright light might be painful, disorienting, harmful to eyes adapted to low-light conditions. Their social structures might be vastly different. Underground living imposes certain constraints. Space is limited. Resources must be managed carefully. Ventilation and climate control are critical. This might lead to more collectivist social organizations, where individual desires are subordinated to the needs of the group, where careful planning and cooperation are essential for survival. Or it might lead to rigid hierarchies, with strict control over resources and movement. Or it might result in something we don't have a framework for, social structures adapted to their specific environment and challenges. Their technology, as we've discussed, would operate on different principles, but their science would be different too. They wouldn't have astronomy, no stars to observe, no sky to study. Their understanding of physics might be more advanced in some areas, seismology, thermodynamics, material science under extreme pressure, and less developed in others, optics, aerodynamics, atmospheric science. They might have discovered principles of physics that we haven't, because they encountered phenomena we never experience on the surface, and they might be completely ignorant of things we take for granted. Their art would be adapted to their senses. Music might be their primary art form, since visual art would be limited in darkness. Or they might create art using textures, shapes that are appreciated through touch rather than sight. Or they might use bioluminescence in ways we'd find beautiful and strange, creating light paintings in the darkness. Their literature and storytelling would reflect their values, their history, their unique perspective, stories about the deep places, about survival, about the world above ground viewed as a strange and dangerous realm. And their religion, their philosophy, their understanding of existence would be shaped by their environment. They live inside the earth, surrounded by rock, with heat rising from below and cold descending from above. They might view the earth itself as a living entity, as mother and protector. They might have creation myths about emerging from the stone, about being born from the planet's heart. They might see surface dwellers as those who abandoned the true world, who fled to the thin and dangerous realm above. Or they might view us with pity, as primitive cousins who never learned to thrive in the depths. In other words, if we met them, if we somehow established contact, we wouldn't be meeting humans who live underground. We'd be meeting a different species, or at least a different branch of humanity, that has diverged so far from us that meaningful communication would be challenging. We'd be dealing with beings whose psychology, motivations, and worldview are fundamentally alien to our own. And that's the optimistic scenario. the one where they're still recognizably related to us, where communication is possible even if difficult. But what if the separation is older? What if the underground civilization didn't emerge 12,000 years ago, but much earlier? What if they're not an offshoot of Homo sapiens, but a parallel branch of human evolution, or even a separate species entirely that evolved intelligence independently? The fossil record shows that multiple species of hominids existed simultaneously for much of our evolutionary history. Homo sapiens coexisted with Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo erectus, possibly others. These species interbred occasionally. Most humans today carry Neanderthal DNA, but they were distinct, with different physical characteristics, different behaviors, different adaptations. What if one of these species, rather than going extinct, went underground? What if they survived by retreating into caves and never came back out? Neanderthals, for instance, were already adapted to cold environments, with stockier builds and larger nasal cavities. They used caves extensively, showed evidence of sophisticated tool use and possibly symbolic thought. If a population of Neanderthals had survived by going deeper into cave systems, if they had continued to evolve in that environment for the past 40,000 years, what would they be now? Would they still be Neanderthals, or would they be something new, something shaped by 2,000 generations of subterranean existence? And what if the separation is even older? What if there's a branch of hominid evolution that diverged millions of years ago, that never lived on the surface at all, that evolved intelligence in the underground environment while our ancestors were still learning to walk upright in the African savanna? They would be so different from us that we might not recognize them as related at all. They might have body plans adapted to their environment in ways we can't imagine. They might think in ways we can't comprehend. They might be to us what we are to apes, similar in some ways, but operating on a different level with capabilities we can barely recognize as intelligence. This is perhaps the most unsettling possibility. Not that there's another civilization beneath us, but that there's another form of intelligence entirely. Something that evolved alongside us but separately. Something that shares the planet but not our history. Something that is as alien to us as any creature from another world, but infinitely closer, separated by just a few miles of rock. And if such intelligence exists, what are its intentions toward us? Does it view us with curiosity, with indifference, with hostility? Has it been watching us, studying us, waiting to see what we become? Or has it been largely unaware of us, as we've been unaware of it, both species living in separate worlds that rarely touch? The truth is, we have no way to know. We can speculate, theorize, extrapolate from the fragments of evidence and story. But until contact occurs, if it ever does, the underground civilization remains a mystery, a question without an answer, a possibility that hovers between myth and reality, tantalizingly close to proof, but never quite reaching it. And maybe that's where it will stay. Maybe we'll never know for certain. Maybe the deep places will keep their secrets. And maybe we'll continue to walk on the surface of the earth, building our cities and living our lives, while below us, in the warm darkness, another world continues its ancient existence separate and unknowable. Or maybe one day soon the boundary will break. We'll dig too deep. We'll find the entrance. We'll make contact. And everything we thought we knew about the world, about humanity, about our place in the universe will change forever. Until then, the question remains. The mystery endures. And when you stand on solid ground, when you feel the earth beneath your feet, you might remember that solid ground is thin, a fragile shell floating atop a vast and hidden world. And you might wonder what's down there, in the depths we've never seen. You might wonder if they're wondering about us too. And so We stand at the edge of the unknown. The evidence is compelling but not conclusive. The stories persist but remain unprovable. Science dismisses the idea, yet cannot fully explain all the anomalies. The deep places of the Earth remain unexplored, their secrets intact. Perhaps this is how great mysteries are meant to exist, not in the realm of confirmed fact or complete fiction, but in the space between, in the realm of maybe, because that space, that uncertainty, that possibility keeps us looking, keeps us questioning, keeps us curious about the world we inhabit. And isn't that what we need? In an age where so much has been mapped and categorized, where satellites can photograph every square inch of the surface, where it seems like all the great discoveries have been made, don't we need mysteries? Don't we need to know that there are still frontiers, still unknowns, still places where anything might be possible? The underground civilization, whether real or imagined, serves that purpose. It reminds us that the Earth is deeper than we can reach, stranger than we can imagine, and full of possibilities we haven't exhausted. It reminds us that beneath the mundane surface of daily life, beneath the familiar ground we walk on, there might be wonders and terrors beyond our comprehension. And it reminds us that we're still explorers at heart, still driven to seek out the hidden places, to shine light into the darkness, to answer the questions that have haunted humanity since the beginning. What else is out there? What have we missed? What's waiting to be discovered? The answer might be nothing. The depths might be exactly what science says they are. Rock and heat and pressure, magnificent in their own way but lifeless, empty of intelligence or civilization. Or the answer might be everything. The confirmation that we're not alone, that Earth harbours mysteries greater than we imagined, that the old stories were true in ways we never suspected. We won't know until we look, until we go deeper, until we push past the boundaries of what we think is possible and venture into the true unknown. And when we do, if we do, we'll finally have our answer. Until then, the civilization sleeps in the depths, or watches, or waits, and we walk above them, oblivious or nearly so, lives on the thin surface of a world that is far stranger, far deeper, and far more mysterious than we ever dared to believe. The ground beneath you is not as solid as it seems. The darkness below is not as empty as you think. And the old myths, the persistent stories, the legends that refuse to die, maybe they're trying to tell us something we're not quite ready to hear. Maybe they're warning us. Maybe they're preparing us. Maybe they're simply reminding us of what our ancestors knew and we forgot. That the Earth has secrets, that the deep places are alive, and that when you descend far enough, when you go deep enough into the darkness, you might find more than rock and stone. You might find the truth, and the truth might be looking back.